Good evening, everyone. I will endeavor not to hit anything up here and ruin the setup we just got together. We welcome you to Catholic Charities of Oregon, both those in the room and those of you joining us online tonight. I'm Ed Langlois. I'm Communications Director for Catholic Charities. We are just thrilled that Rabbi Michael Cahana has agreed to come tonight, and we'll say more about him in a moment. But for those of you who might be unfamiliar with Catholic Charities, we are the official social action arm of the Catholic Church in Western Oregon. We have roots going back to the 1840s, but officially began during the Great Depression. And today we carry on that work by helping people experiencing homelessness find a home, resettling refugees, giving legal help to migrants, building affordable housing, and providing an array of services people need to stay housed and make progress. Tonight's talk is part of an annual event. Initially, what came to be known as the Tobin Lectures were annual talks and workshops led from about 1940 to 1960 by Monsignor Thomas Tobin. He was really the undisputed Catholic thought leader in Oregon in the mid-20th century. He appeared in the newspapers and the radio regularly, and he spoke often about the social implications of belief. During World War II, civic officials even called on him to mediate labor disputes with Portland shipbuilders. Everyone respected this man. We hope that the new Catholic Charities Tobin Lectures will explore themes of social teaching with a local twist, because we're convinced that faith has serious social implications in everyday life. We began these a year ago, laying a historical foundation of Catholic charitable and social justice work in Oregon. And now we're going even farther back to the very roots of divine justice and love. You'll notice around the room some placards with a QR code in case you'd like to contribute tonight. For those of you online, we'll be putting the link in the chat at some point. What you donate will be shared between Catholic Charities and Rabbi Cahana's community. And now to our speaker. In 2006, Rabbi Michael Cahana became senior rabbi for Portland's oldest synagogue, Congregation Beth Israel, which was established in 1859. As a key leader of Portland's Jewish community, he has offered a steady response to poverty, including using the very building where he works to host people experiencing homelessness when the weather turns dangerous. For years, he was part of an annual presentation on a faith topic given with nearby Catholic and Episcopalian pastors. I was a reporter at the time at the Catholic newspaper and assigned to cover the talks, and it became one of my favorite beats as Rabbi Cahana's ideas were deeply meaningful to people of all those traditions. He serves on local interreligious councils and is a past president of the Oregon Board of Rabbis. He's also highly engaged in social action. He serves on the leadership team of Lift Every Voice Oregon, an interfaith movement to pass gun safety legislation in the state. He's also on the board of Cedars-Sinai Park Senior Living. Rabbi Cahana's academic interests include the interface of religion and science, including medical ethics. Hebrew teaching on welcoming the stranger, caring for the widow, caring for the world is really the supporting structure of some of Western culture's finest achievements. And we at Catholic Charities realize that our programs and our advocacy must remain true to these fundamental principles in order for our work to be effective. And so, Rabbi Michael Cahana, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you for that really lovely introduction. I'm honored. And welcome to the people who are watching online. I'm sorry you get mostly the back of my head, but you can see these lovely people. So you get the same view I do. It feels so good. I'm particularly honored to be able to speak here at Catholic Charities, which does such incredible work in our community, and particularly on the work that's being done with immigrants. And I think that work is always important, but not to be overly political, but the language that's being used about immigrants in our country these days is really very frightening. And I know those of you who have been involved with welcoming people into our community know with the kind of passion and care that so many of these people come and how much they give back to our community. So I really want to honor the work that's done in this building and all around in our community. The interfaith work that Ed mentioned is really important to me, and I come by it pretty honestly. My father of blessed memory was very involved in the civil rights movement in my hometown of Houston, Texas, marched with Dr. King, and along with many other Jewish leaders, felt it was a religious responsibility, as you said. It's not just a nice idea to do something, but it came from his religious tradition. And he felt that it was important to not walk alone, that he walked famously with ministers and with priests who also felt compelled to stand up for civil rights in that era where there was really nothing more important. He was an immigrant to the United States and had married my mother, who was a Holocaust survivor, and felt that there was no more important cause than civil rights during that era. And as we continue into the world that we're living in, we know that there are great issues like immigration, like homelessness, like mental illness, so many different problems that our community has. And no one of us can solve it alone, that it is best done together in community. So honoring this lecture series, as you spoke about, really honored, feel like this speaks deeply to what I care about. We're going to continue to have technical problems as we go along, because that's the way things work, but that's okay. I want to start with a story because I'm Jewish. We can't do anything without a story. Now, I'm sure you know this story, so I'm going to tell it fairly briefly. Once there was a lovely community, a small community of people who built their homes, their small town, at the curve of a river. And on one side was a rather dangerous waterfall. On the other side was a beautiful, calm, sweet river that flowed gently along. And they loved being in that place. There was a lot of nature. These were good, hardworking, decent people. One day, they're standing by the edge of the river. Some people are standing by the edge of the river. They see someone drowning, coming down the river. They're floating, drowning. They can't swim. They can't get through. And they're about to approach the waterfall. They're going to go over the end. They will certainly die. The strongest swimmer of the community jumps into the water, never a thought for his own safety, runs, rescues the person, brings him back onto shore, and the people rejoice. He's a great hero. They do what you're supposed to do. They make a parade. They name a street after him. They give him a little medal, and they have a party. Everybody has a wonderful time, and he's the hero of the town. That's really fantastic. What an amazing person who was able to do this rescue. Unfortunately, the next day, there were two people floating down the river. So the guy, he shows what he could do, jumps back into the river, and he rescues both of them. Oh my gosh, how many parades can we have? But we're going to do everything we can. We're going to celebrate this guy, what an amazing person he is, and how much he does. The next day, there are three people coming down the river. Well, we can't ask so much from one person. So two people jump into the river, and they start bringing the people out, and they see, this is amazing. We really have something here. We have people who are good swimmers, and we can rescue people, and so we're going to give him a job. We're going to hire a lifeguard to stand at the edge of the river and rescue people as they fall, as they come down the water. So the people feel very good about themselves. They're paying money for this now. This gets to be serious. And the lifeguard continues to bring people across, but more and more people keep floating down the river. And so they start, what are we going to do? And they have to hire two people now. And it's starting to be a whole production. And it's getting to be like, what's the matter with these people? Why do people get into the water if they can't swim? So they put up a sign, and that says, if you can't swim, don't be in the river. Well, that's going to solve the problem now, right? Anybody sees that sign, they're absolutely not going into the water. And more and more people continue down, and they jump in and they bring them back and they rescue them. And they're trying, the people get together and they have a town meeting. What are we going to do? We can't continue to pay all of these people to be lifeguards. We put up a sign, we're running out of options. What can we possibly, what's the matter with these people that they get in the water and they don't swim? Why is it our problem? You know what? Let them go over the waterfall. That'll teach them. They should know better than to go into the water without knowing how to swim. One little girl says to the town, have we thought to go up the river and see why do people keep falling in? That's social justice. That little girl recognized that if there's real problems in a community, you don't solve the problems the way that we normally think about solving problems. We think of solving problems. We look at what's the immediate, what's right in front of us. How do we take care of the emergency? And you have to take care of the emergency. But at the same time, you have to go upstream. You have to find out why people are failing. What is causing the real problems? So many of us are connected to these important ideas of social action. Social action is dealing with the emergency. How are we going to do what needs to be done in this emergency situation? Social justice is stepping back and trying to say, how do we deal with the systemic problems? What are really the root causes? And no one likes to talk about root causes. It's really hard to fund looking at root causes because that seems very woo-woo, doesn't it? It's like, oh, all these terrible liberals come up with these ideas of like wanting to get to root problems. What's the matter? We know how to deal with it. We jump in the water, right? Social action and social justice. Two sides of an idea that is very important. Social action, sorry, we have these things in the middle, but I like this explanation that I found from a synagogue in Sharon, Massachusetts. Social action deals with the world as it is. Short-term assistance, feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, comforting the sick, helping the needy. Don't think any of us would argue that we shouldn't be doing those things, right? Incredibly important. I see it as part of my religious mission. I know many of you here do as well. We have to do these things. But social justice sees the world not as it is, but as it could be. As, I would even argue, as it should be. Right? Advocating for change to address the systemic root causes of hunger, homelessness, and poverty, etc. Social action is the left foot. Social justice is the right foot. And we must stand in the middle. Stand on both of those feet for this concept that I'm going to be talking about today, the Hebrew term tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. Now, Ed mentioned these ideas about social justice and how the Hebrew Bible, the root of my tradition, gives many ideas about how to enact social action. Very important concepts. But the idea of tikkun olam, actually not a biblical idea, although it is rooted in biblical text. Don't worry, I'm going to give you text. Again, I'm a rabbi. I'm going to give you a lot of text today. So I hope everybody's got their reading glasses from the back of the room. We'll do our best, and other people will help to read. We're going to be rooted in text. But tikkun olam is an idea that appears in many places in Jewish texts, but is not at its core a biblical idea. The place where it probably has its most profound meaning in the way that many of us think about tikkun olam today actually is rooted not in Torah or an ancient biblical text, but in the more modern concept of Kabbalah. Anybody here have heard of Kabbalah? Right? Okay, anybody done a little bit of studying of Kabbalah here and there? Well, I can see your brain is fried, so you must have studied Kabbalah. Jewish mysticism is a complicated concept. It's actually been around for a long time. Every religious tradition has its mystical traditions. That is a part of human nature, that we kind of explore what is, as we like to say, beyond the veil, what is not immediately apparent, but is kind of the secret, the hidden, the mystical. And Jewish Kabbalah goes back from the beginning. I like to say that there are sort of three rails. I don't know if any of you spent time in New York, but you know the subway system, right? There are these two rails that the car rides on. And in Judaism, we have this the text of Jewish law, that is one rail, and midrash, which is sort of stories, explanations, deeper investigations. That's the other rail, and our Jewish tradition kind of rides on those rails. And then there's a third rail, and if you spend time in the New York subway, you know you don't touch the third rail, because that is that's where all the power is. That's where all the danger is. Right? That is where the deep energy is that actually makes all of this happen. That third rail in Jewish tradition is Kabbalah. That's the mystical tradition. And it actually underlies much of what we do, even though we don't talk about it very much. So that concept of Kabbalah is out there. Kabbalah, as I said, has been around for thousands and thousands of years. But this gentleman, Rabbi Isaac ben Shlomo Luria, Ashkenazi, who was known as the Ari, the great rabbi of his time, lived in Tzfat, where my family's from, in northern Israel, a very mystical area. It's in the hills. It is, it's right by Lake Tiberias. It is a place where the Kinneret, it is a place where there is it's just very easy to feel like you're somehow touching heaven. It's a really beautiful and remarkable place. Rabbi Luria in that place developed a new form of Kabbalah that hadn't existed before. And it is actually the basis of Jewish mysticism that when people think of Kabbalah today, it's really based on Lurianic Kabbalah. That idea, it's a tad complicated. I'm not going to get into a lot of details because that's a class all by itself. But the most important element of it is in the creation, God's creation. In order to allow creation to happen, God, who was everything, there was nothing else. It was only God. And God decided that there should be something else. There should be a creation. There should be a universe. In order to do that, God did something that's absolutely remarkable. It's called tzimtzum. It was a withdrawal. God created space in which the universe could exist. There was a place in which it was not all God. It's not that God was absent, but it was not all God. There was still divine essence that was in there, but it was somewhat removed. And that allows the universe to exist. Everybody with me so far? Now, to allow that creation to continue happening, there is what's called a divine flow. That God energy, the essence of God, continued to flow into that empty space in which the universe existed. And if it didn't flow, the universe would cease to exist. So there's an action that when we talk about ourselves as being part of the divine world, that's what it's meant. That there is divinity in us that continues to flow through us and all of the universe. It's not, God sitting on a chair somewhere with a long beard and kind of, like watching on his iPad to see if you've been naughty or nice, right? This is a God that is actively involved in the ongoing nature of the universe, not something that happens thousands of years ago. It's ongoing. It's continuing. So there is this element. This is a map of the universe. Don't worry too much about it. But this divine flow flows through that, and actually the human being it's also a map of the human being. That divine flow was initially in these containers that allowed, if you think about like hot liquid being poured from one cup to another, right? That divine flow was pouring from one cup to another in order to get it to the temperature, as it were, that we could survive in, right? We couldn't take the direct flow. It would be far too much. So it had to be mediated through these different elements and poured down ultimately into where we could exist, which is down below, even below this flow. But the flow was too great, and those divine containers shattered. And the shards of those divine containers got lost in the universe. These shards that held on to divinity are out there, scattered all around, scattered in the world around us. And the human task is to find those little shards and reunite them with God, to bring them back. So we're actually a part of the divine creation. We have this task. And that reunification is called tikkun olam, perfecting our world. So this is a remarkable thing. We think, what's human purpose? Why do I exist? I exist to be part of that ongoing dialogue with God. I exist in trying to reunify those lost pieces of divinity and try to make the universe, and not just the universe that we experience, but everything, more whole. And so my actions actually have cosmic consequences. Your actions, the things that we do, we think it doesn't matter, nobody's watching, who cares? What can I get away with? We spend a lot of our time figuring out what can I get away with. But if we really think about it, what we're doing, if we think that our actions really can either help the divine flow or impede the divine flow, if we're being positive, if we're making a positive change, we're making that flow continue. And contrarily, if we are doing things that are distasteful, doing things that harm other people, using our words, our incredible, powerful, no other animal on our planet, at least that we know of, uses language at least in the way that we do. There's probably some kind of language, but not the kind of language that we have. And our language has the ability to heal a person, right? Every one of us have had that moment where we've said something that made a difference, that changed someone's life. And our words have the power to harm. And we know we've done that too. We've said something, inadvertently probably, that has been incredibly hurtful. But that's our power. So we are participants with God in this concept of tikkun olam. And that divine flow, that's what we're talking about here. So when we talk about social justice, that's what we mean. That it's not just doing something because it's good, because it makes you feel good, because you think of yourself as a better person, because someone's going to make a parade for you, because someone's going to pin a medal on you. You do what you do because you are part of divine creation. And you, by not doing it, you're making the world worse. By doing something, you are a part of God's conversation with the universe. Have I put too much burden on you? Now you're feeling really guilty? It's very Jewish to feel guilty. I know it's Catholic too, but it's very Jewish to feel guilty, right? And so the world exists in this kind of balance, right? And that's that this biblical text, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. We ask, one of the ways that we read biblical text in particular is to ask everything about the language, including why does the word justice repeat? The sentence makes exactly the same sense if you only use justice once, right? Justice shall you pursue. Good job. Get out there and do it. But that's not what the text says. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Why is it doubled? God hasn't told us. But perhaps there is a concept that justice is not such a simple thing to pursue. It's not that easy to know exactly what's justice. And sometimes you approach and you say, this is justice. And then you look a little bit deeper and it's actually not so just. And someone is actually being harmed. And someone, now maybe you're working just on the local and you're not doing systemic. Maybe justice shall you pursue means that you should stand, as we said before, on social action and social justice as well. That there are two parts to that social justice. And you can't do one without doing the other. You can't say that you're finished. You haven't pursued it. You haven't finished your course if you haven't done each. A lot of burdens on us. So we have to start with first principles. And that is the value of every human life. So here, a good biblical text. There are many texts we don't use the term Old Testament. We use the term Hebrew Bible. We don't have a new one. So we keep with the one we have. We got a lot of texts, but we have one Torah. And there are many laws in the Torah that are very specific about all kinds of different things, but there are some principles, not that often, but sometimes there are principles. And those principles are actually very helpful for us in terms of really understanding what anchors our ideas about what is justice, for example. And this text, I know everybody here knows this text. You may not have seen it as often in Hebrew, but that's the way God said it. So, V'ivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo, b'tselem Elohim bara'ato. God created humankind in the divine image, creating humanity in the image of God. B'tselem Elohim. This, for many of us in the Jewish social justice world, B'tselem Elohim is a first principle. That we are created in this image of God. Now, what does that mean? God surely doesn't look like me. God could do better than that, right? And if I look around this room, I mean, these are lovely people, but everybody looks a little bit different here, right? So it can't be that God looks like us or that we look like God. That doesn't make any sense. Right? So there must be something about us that's not about our physical appearance. That this divine image is an ideal form of who we are. That we carry within us a divinity, a holiness. When you're speaking to another person, on some very real level, you're speaking to God. That's this first principle, that every human being is deserving, is worthwhile. People who make bad choices, also deserving, also created in the image of God. People who've had terrible luck, also created in the image of God. There is that first principle that we have to recognize that humanity. People we disagree with, people with really stupid opinions, also created in the image of God. That's part of it, right? We can disagree with someone, we can dislike someone, and we can still see their humanity. We can still see their divinity. That's what social justice is about. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot of different texts. I'm going to play with a couple of different texts here and there and show how some of these biblical texts are understood at later periods of time. This is a text from the Talmud, which is rabbinic interpretation on biblical text and other conversations that have happened over a period of thousands of years. There have been these debates. Reading the Talmud is actually like listening to an argument between very intelligent people who have very different opinions. And you're reading all of their different opinions, and oftentimes they don't come to a conclusion, which can make reading it really maddening. If all you want is an answer. But if you enjoy the process, if you enjoy disputation, this is why Jews make good lawyers. We're kind of brought up in this world of looking at text and analyzing it and disputing it and arguing about it. And that's how the Talmudic world works. So the Mishnah is an older text that looks at something. So they ask a question, How does the court intimidate a witness into giving testimony for cases of capital law? So in a capital case, you have witnesses, but before the witnesses give their testimony, you have to intimidate them. You have to impress on them the seriousness of their witness. Okay? That what they're saying could bring a person, in this instance, there is a death penalty. So your testimony could mean someone's death, right? And by the way, if it turns out to be a false testimony, you get the death penalty. So, it's serious. We want to make sure we're doing this right, okay? So how do they go about addressing this? Anybody want to read this text? Volunteer leader, go ahead, please. Good and loud, yeah.
Therefore, Adam, the first man, was created alone. To teach you that with regard to anyone who destroys one soul in the Jewish people, the verse ascribes him blame, as if he destroyed an entire world.
Okay, this is a really important concept, right? By the way, there is a parallel text in the Quran. Very interesting. So somehow this principle was well known. And whether the rabbis invented it or they absorbed it from other cultures, whether the Quran absorbed it from other cultures, we don't know exactly. But this concept, it's a really remarkable concept, that each person is as if they are an entire universe to themselves, right? And why is a person like an entire universe or an entire world? They're created in the image of God. Any other reason? They've got, what's the one thing that we know about God? God is? Sorry? God is who he is. That is a good, actually Maimonides, I'm glad nobody has a fast answer. Yeah, and even yours is like right? Maimonides says that you can never make a positive comment about God. You can never say God is, because the minute you say God is, you've now reduced God into something, right? You've made God less than infinite. So you can say what God is not, right? God is not limited. God is not mortal. God ain't got no body. Young Frankenstein, you're welcome. Right? So we can say these negative comments. But so you could put it in a negative sense, but what do we say about God? God is not mortal, right? God is not limited, right? And so if we are in some way in the image of God, there is something about us that is immortal. There is something about us that is infinite, right? And on the very prosaic level, right, any one person could wind up being the progenitor of a line of people that goes on forever. If you've seen virtually any Star Trek episode that involves time travel, you know the problem here, right? If you change something, you've now created an entire different universe. So we have all of that, right? So Star Trek's very Jewish, but that's another story. In any case, every human being, right, is like a universe, and so to destroy one person is to destroy a universe. And conversely, we could imagine that anyone who sustains, this says of the Jewish people, they were not universalists. The rabbis were not universalists. They were dealing with the laws of their own people, and that's what they were talking about. So it's complicated from that perspective. Doesn't mean they disregarded other people, but they're saying, I can't comment on them because I don't know them. What do I know? Right? But anyone who destroys a soul, it is as if, or who sustains a soul, it's as if you sustained another universe. Okay, and this text I like also. This is a nice midrash, a story that the rabbis said. Anybody? I know the first part's going to be hard for you to read, but anybody want to be the reader? We should take a microphone so people at home can read. But they're seeing the text, so they get it. That's okay. All right. Thanks. The first line is, and this serves to tell us of the greatness of the Holy One.
Holy One, blessed be God, as when a person stamps several coins with one seal, they are all similar to each other.
Okay, now we don't do a lot of coin pressing, but you can imagine if you got the machine, you're turning out coins. And of course, because you're doing it on a press, everyone is going to be identical.
But the supreme ruler, the Holy One, blessed be God, stamped all people with the seal of Adam, the first man, as all of them are his offspring, and not one of them is similar to another.
Right? This is amazing. This is what God can do. Using that same press, ka-chunk, 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 every one of those coins comes out differently, as we see in this beautiful room.
Therefore, since all humanity descends from one person, each and every person is obligated to say, "The world was created for my sake," as one person can be the source of all humanity and recognize the significance of each person's actions.
Okay, so thank you. So this is the very interesting thing, right? That we can say the whole world exists just for me. Has anybody ever had that feeling every once in a while? The whole world, it's all there just for me. I'm feeling great today, right? But this anchors it in this concept. If you can feel that way, that's great. What about the person next to you? They also think the world was created just for them. And guess what? You're both right. Right? And that's that concept, right? This ability to empathize with someone who is different than you, who has different opinions, who has different life experiences, has different history than you. They also, every one of them, the world was created just for them because they are stamped from the image of God. This is, really remarkable. I mean, all this is trying to get us to a place of empathy and understanding, of seeing other people as worthy entities just as you are. Now, Rabbi Nachman of Wroclaw, later rabbi, rather famous one, takes this a little bit differently. Okay, anybody, can I get another reader? Thank you. You want to read it in Hebrew? No, you can do it in English, it's fine.
Rashi Mashanga Alawalaba.
Look at tomorrow.
Now each person must say, the entire world was created only for my sake.
Okay, so now the Rabbi Nachman Wroclaw, quoting back from the Talmud, is now going to expound on it a little bit.
Consequently, because the world was created for my sake, I must constantly look into and consider ways of making the world better, to provide what is missing in the world and pray on its behalf.
Right? If the world was created just for me, I don't get to just sit back and say, nice sunset, God, thanks. That was great. You didn't even know it was my birthday. That's so nice, right? You don't just take, right? If the world was created just for me, I have a responsibility to it. I have to take care of this world. I have to make it better. I have to see what's missing. I love that, right? To see what's missing and to pray on its behalf, to try to fix what is broken. That's the notion of tikkun olam, to repair the world, to repair what is broken. And if the world is created just for me, I have the power, or as I like to say, I have the ability, therefore I have the responsibility. Okay? If you've got the ability to do something, you've got a responsibility to do it and not just sit back and say, you know what, someone else will do it. Or I've got an idea, let's hire somebody to do it for me. Right? No, it's on you. It's your responsibility. You have to make that change. It doesn't have to be the change of all the world. I don't know, most of us don't have that power to actually change the entire world, but we do have the power to make a difference in someone else's life. We do have the power to affect the world around us, the people that we interact with, to pay attention to the systemic issues that are there, to stand on 2 feet, right? To deal with the immediate, what's the emergency before me, and what's the systemic? What's the problem? Where do these problems start? How can I go upstream and make a difference? Then, of course, we can always count on the prophets. They're going to give us some good ideas, right? And this one, I think, probably many people here familiar with this text from Isaiah. Anybody want to give me a good prophetic reading? Up front. Here we go. Right in the front row.
Learn to do good. Devote yourselves to justice. Aid the oppressed. Uphold the rights of the orphan. Defend the cause of the widow.
Okay, now, interestingly enough, thank you, very well read. The interesting thing, this word chamutz is, here's a good technical term, hapax legomenon. Anybody know what an hapax legomenon is? What is it? Perfect, right? Because Hebrew was a language not used for a long period of time, and we only understand it for its own context. It wasn't used as a spoken language, it was used as a prayer language. We don't always know exactly what the word means. If it only appears once in the entire corpus of biblical text, you have to kind of try to get some ideas of what it means, but it's hard to figure out. So some read that word, chamutz, is actually setting right the ruthless. In other words, those who abuse power, so you are not just aiding the oppressed, you are fighting those who abuse their power. Okay, and sometimes those two are the same thing, but I love that sort of double reading because it does call to us that we have a responsibility. If someone has power and is abusing that power, we have a responsibility to do something about that too. And if there is someone who is oppressed, we have a responsibility to reach out to them. So that's good. So I see all of you looking at me and saying, yeah, Rabbi, great, nice idea. How am I supposed to do this? Right? You know, it's like I'm supposed to, you're telling me, thank you very much. I got from your lecture, I'm responsible for the entire world. I mean, I got to go have dinner. You know, what are you trying to do to me here? Okay. So actually, biblical text gives some very specific examples. Now, the text, the Torah text in particular, is very agricultural because that was the world that they were in. Much of these biblical texts were written in a world that was moving from an agricultural to a city, to an urban. So you think you've got urban-rural divide going on here in Oregon. That was really their world, you know, as they were trying to come to that reality. So many of these examples are agricultural, but they're important. Can I have a reader for this text? Thanks.
And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God.
Now, in biblical text, when something ends with, I am the Lord your God, you think of it as the king who puts a stamp on something and says, thus saith the king, right? So I am the Lord your God is a way of saying, thus says God. In other words, I really mean this. So we take it pretty seriously, okay? So what is this? We've all heard this, reaping the corners of the fields, right? This is familiar to many of you here, right? So we just have to picture it. Most agricultural plots of land are rectangular in some form or another. So draw a circle in the middle of it. And what happens? You've got corners that lie outside the circle. Everything in the circle is yours. Have a good time. You can eat it, you can sell it, you can give it to your children, you can do anything you want with it. The things outside of the circle, the corner of the fields, according to biblical law, does not belong to you. I bought this land. I've got the deed. It's like they drew a picture of it. It's like, it's carved in clay. I know it's real, right? Doesn't belong to you. Who does it belong to? Widow, orphan, the poor in the community, right? And what do? They are the ones who glean in that land. Here's Deuteronomy text that takes it just a little bit further, right? Not only do these corners of the land not belong to you, but as you are going through and you're harvesting and you accidentally leave something behind, you don't turn around and pick it up. Once you've dropped it, it no longer belongs to you. Right? So even as you are working your own land, some of what you are working doesn't belong to you. Now, why is this important? Think of this as a notion of giving tzedakah, of giving charity. We're going to talk about tzedakah in a minute, right? What does this mean to have that kind of this concept of giving charity? We'll use that word for the moment. What's different about that than saying, oh, yeah, I see you need something here, I'm going to give this to you, right? What's different? You're not in charge of who gets it. You don't get to say, you get this, you get that. It's not yours, right? So that's one thing. What else? Tell me about intention.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm reaping the harvest
Right.
and I decide 10% is going to go to the poor.
Yeah, so you're making calculations. I'm going through it. 10%. But what happens if I do that? Then it's going to be 11%. Can't have that. So what do we do? Right? So there's no intentionality.
Whereas if
That's
you
behind
just
this.
drop it, it's there.
But for whom is there intentionality? Who's got some intentionality here? Whoever needs it.
Well, yeah.
Whoever needs it doesn't come to you and say, oh, do you mind? Can I just have a little bit of, could you just drop this on the floor for me so I can take it? No. There's no conversation with you. They go to the corner of the fields, they pick whatever is there, it's theirs. There's no one's checking off to see, did they take too much? Did they fill out the proper forms? Are we going to means test this? Right? There's none of that. You have the need, you take what you need. Right? So what does that give to the person who is taking from the corners of the field? What do they gain? Dignity. Dignity. Right? They are not coming to you with their handout for a handout. Right? That's the power of this concept. So I don't know about you. I live in the city. I don't have a farm. I don't have corners of fields. I mean, I do, but my dog patrols all of that, so I don't have much to do with it, right? But there are other ways of doing this. So if I think about what my responsibility in the world is, my responsibility begins the first step. I have to think about the dignity of the person who's receiving. I have to think about what it feels like to be someone who needs a handout, who needs sustenance. So great, this is a practical reality. It's very concrete, but also can apply to all kinds of different situations that are beyond this particular concrete example. Okay. And the Talmud goes on. I don't want to take too much time here because we're getting late. But you don't protest about other people who come to take it because it's not supposed to be for them. You don't go through these means testing. You don't go through all of this process saying someone needs it. They see themselves as someone who needs this. That's good enough. You're not the judge and the jury on this situation. There are other biblical texts that deal with similar kinds of concepts. This one I know everybody here is familiar with, right? Can I get a reader? Someone's got to give me a good Leviticus. What's a Leviticus voice? Someone already, please, right up front. But get the microphone so people can.
You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am Adonai.
Adonai, right? Again, I am Adonai, stamp. This is important, right? So what does this text tell us? You've read it 1,000 times. What does it mean? But I need you to translate it into English for me.
Well, you shouldn't insult anybody just because they might be different from you.
Okay, so what does it mean not insult the deaf? Why would you insult the deaf?
Oh, they wouldn't.
They won't
hear it.
know, right? They
but
wouldn't
anyway.
know that you're insulting them, right? Right? I could, again, what I said earlier, I can get away with it. They'll never know. What harm does it do? It's not going to hurt them.
They'll know they'll know you're ignoring them.
Right? They will, of course they'll know, right? Of course they will. And of course, more importantly, you will know, right? You become a less compassionate person when you insult, when you get away with it, right? What harm is it? It's a victimless crime. It's not a victimless crime. You are harmed, right? Stumbling block before the blind, same kind of thing, except there's direct results. Yes.
They can't see you, but you're tipping.
I don't know that story. That's a beautiful story. I love that, right? Tip your hat to the blind person. They won't see it, but you'll see it. And, then those around you will see it. You give honor and respect, even if you're not going to get anything out of it, right? Well, I got to find the source of that story. I love it, right? And by the way, this one of my kids is a disability rights advocate, right? Got a master's degree in disability rights advocacy, based on this text, right? I don't know if that was what motivated her. I think her mom is what motivated her. That's the important thing. But that notion, this Jewish notion that we have a responsibility, that underrides. It was put into law in America with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that said in a public accommodation, you have to make sure everything is accessible to everyone. And the things that you have to go through to think about, in what way is this building that I'm building not accessible? In what way are my religious services inaccessible? We had a conversation today. Someone pointed out that the book that we use, our prayer book, is really heavy. And for some people, that's a real stumbling block. Now, what can we do? What technology can we come up with that could allow people to use a prayer book where they wouldn't have that and wouldn't have to ask someone for help, that they could simply have that accessible to them all the time? That's part of this, recognizing the incredible diversity in our world and seeing every person as being worthy and worth being included. Beautiful that it goes right back to our biblical text. Okay, with a few minutes to talk about tzedakah, right? This idea of tzedakah, which is most often translated as charity, right? And again, in Islam, there's a very similar concept. It's called sadaqah. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but it is a word that obviously has the same root, comes from the same origin as tzedakah. It's very interesting that those similarities, among the many ways that there are similarities between Islam and Judaism. Charity, this concept of charity, is this notion of a spontaneous act of goodwill. Nobody's forcing you to do it. Nobody says, it's like it's charity time, go do it, right? This is your action of goodwill, and it makes the world a better place. Tzedakah is different. It is an ethical obligation. It's a responsibility. It is a sense that this is part of your responsibility in the world is to do action. It's not do this when it feels right for you, when you feel like it, when the opportunity arises. Tzedakah is a requirement. It's mitzvah, right? Some people translate mitzvah as meaning a good deed. That's not what it means. It means responsibility. It is a requirement. Islam has a very similar idea that you are required to give a certain percentage of your income is the corner of the fields. It doesn't belong to you. It must be given to charitable sources. Right? So it is this concept that, again, biblical, very ancient, It's agricultural. How do I put it into action? With tzedakah, right? With that, and tzedakah is deeply ingrained in Judaism. This is an ancient gravestone I found a picture of someone putting a tin into, in Yiddish you call it a pushka. It's these little tin cups that were, those in the Jewish community remember growing up with this. This is how you bought trees to plant in Israel. There were these tin cups that people would put a coin in, and you'd make these collections. And children were brought up with this idea that this is a responsibility. Right? You go to religious school with, part of your allowance is to give to tzedakah. But it's deeply, deeply ingrained in Jewish concept. Now, and say, okay, if I'm going to give tzedakah, how much am I supposed to give? Right? Is there limits, right? This is good Talmudic thinking. You always have to give an idea. How are you actually going to put it into action? This text from Maimonides, who has actually a whole treatise on this. It's more complicated than is here. But as you can see, I'll just skim it. That the giver should give according to their financial capability. How much are they supposed to give? The most desirable is to give 1/5 of your resources. Giving 1/10 is ordinary. Giving less means you're a cheapskate. And you should never refrain. Even the poor are supposed to give tzedakah. Now, you're not supposed to give so much tzedakah that you need tzedakah for yourself. But no one is so poor that they can't help someone else either. Right? So we're all, we're all human beings. We're all engaged. Some of us have a lot of blessings. Some of us have a lot of blessing, most of which we don't deserve. That just, it's the way it turned out. Got lucky to have been born to good parents. Been lucky to have born in an era where we don't die of diseases that everybody died from in earlier eras. Right? We're incredibly fortunate. And that notion that a certain amount of this just doesn't belong to me. It is meant to be given away. It is meant for someone else. And that's part of what it means to be a human being. We're just engaged in all of this together. We could do a little bit about these levels of tzedakah. There's an interesting concept of a Maimonides ladder, which is not going to, oh, there we go. I made the ladder rise badly. Okay, that's all right. We'll go through it. But there are many different ways of giving tzedakah. That's not going to move until it's done, right? But all of these levels, the highest level of all is giving to someone who doesn't know, you don't know who they are, they don't know who you are, right? Another level is one of giving where they don't know who's giving it, but the person knows who the giver is, et cetera, et cetera. You can go down the line of all of these different ways of giving, and the lowest level, the level is giving someone before they ask. A lower level than that, giving someone who before they ask, giving pleasantly, and the lowest level is giving begrudgingly. But even if you're at the lowest level, there's no ninth ladder. There's no ninth step, right? There's no not giving. You still do. You still participate. You are engaged with the people around you. Okay. We're getting to the end. I want to. Okay, one concept that is being talked about here is about giving to someone before they're in the worst straits, before they've hit rock bottom. Say, okay, then I'm going to give to you, right? Is to recognize when someone is on path and turn them around. How much easier it is to help someone turn around when they are on that moment. The highest level I also didn't, I went through it a little bit too quickly. But the highest level on Maimonides' ladder is not giving someone, a present, but to give them a loan or to get them into business, to help them, to teach them a trade, to help them help themselves. That's the highest level, right? That's the kind of tzedakah that we should ultimately be pursuing. And then we also have this concept of helping people to find their way before they fall ultimately. There's so much more to say, but I'm going to kind of end it here with another prophetic text. Can I get one more prophetic reader? Ezekiel, Ezekiel's gonna really turn your hair gray. Okay, did it to me. Who wants to read it? Thank you.
And I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit into you. I will remove the heart of stone from your body and give you a heart of flesh.
Now, as Ed mentioned at the very beginning, I'm really interested in medical bioethics. And this text is actually quoted as allowing the concept of organ transplantation in Jewish ideology, because literally God says, I'm going to take out the heart of stone, we're going to put in a heart, a living heart. So it's an interesting. But more importantly than that, which is just reading it on a very surface level, what is really being said here is that we who so often find ourselves with a hardened heart. And it's not surprising that we have a hardened heart, right? The world is tough. We've got a hard enough time getting through our own day, taking care of our responsibilities, our immediate responsibilities. It can be hard. And so we don't always have a lot of compassion left over. When we kind of look a little bit outside of our circle, our heart is hardened. We think someone else is going to take care of that. People are paid to do this, right? They don't need me. And the prophet says, that hard heart that you have, God's going to take that heart from you. God's going to take away that heart of stone, and it's going to give you a heart of flesh. He's going to give you compassion. He's going to enable you to really see the humanity in the person around you. It's a lot of responsibility. It is really a very hard thing to do. But I think those of us who, come to organizations like Catholic Charities, who see a responsibility in the world and look to each other to help to make the world a better place, understand that we can't live with a heart of stone, that we are part of that divine flow, that releasing the sparks of divinity that exist in our world. And each of us can be part of tikkun olam, of perfecting our very broken world. Thank you. I'd love to take some questions if we have time.
Yes.
Or comments.
If you raise your hand, I'll bring a microphone to you to ask questions.
You're going through the list of degrees of charity, I think. But one thing that came to mind when you were talking about I've lost the word. But anyway, but material possessions, things, things we own. What's the word I've lost? But anyway, the private property, that's it. We have this notion of private property, and this is mine. And if if we're so tight on private property, if that notion wasn't so ingrained in ourselves, if we saw things, a little more loosely, whatever, it might be willing to, might be this ebb and flow or this share.
Thank you. I think it's important to note that. And that's really what the corners of the fields are, right? The truth of the matter is all of the land is private property. That whole rectangle is private property. You've got a deed for it, but it's more than you need. You don't actually need all of that, right? So it's not saying that you can't have private property, that you should give away everything to the point that you now become someone who needs tzedakah. But you can also recognize that there's a boundary, there's a circle around you. And outside of that circle, it's enough. You can share even in your private property. So I think you're right. Our struggle in Western civilization is that we've taken this notion of private property as an absolute, right? And I'm going to defend my property to the utmost. I'm going to use deadly force to defend my property because there's nothing more important, right? Remember, the original writing of the Constitution was life, liberty, and property. They changed it to pursuit of happiness, but the original writing was life, liberty, and property because that's how much we thought about property, right? So it's deeply ingrained in us. There's no question. So this is hard. We have to push ourselves somewhat to be able to think of ourselves in a more expansive mode and to know that we really do have enough.
And just quickly, one more thought is in the Catholic Church anyway, we have a Jubilee year coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you're aware of
Biblical
that.
text, of course.
I missed the first few minutes. I don't know what you.
Oh, no, we didn't talk about Jubilee. Yeah.
I didn't know if you want to give any thoughts on the Jubilee year and,
It's
for forgiving debts or releasing prisoners or.
very much biblical text, that notion of ultimately that there is this, the 7 times 7, the 49th year, the year after the 49th year, which if I can count correctly is 50. And that 50th year is a Jubilee where things were supposed to go back. This was, the biblical text is talking about the land of Israel, a practice that's still observed in Israel. The Jubilee less so, but that 7th year in which the fields lay fallow, right? There's a year that you're supposed to let the land rest. You can go to Israel, and if you're there, I've been to Israel twice on Jubilee, on those 7-year cycles, and seen that, and you see these big billboards in the middle of fields that say in Hebrew, this land is Shemitah land. Is to be left fallow. They're following that biblical commandment. There isn't that Jubilee now because the rabbis determined that they couldn't count it. I think the church basically took the biblical text and created a new calendar based on it. But the Jubilee year doesn't exist anymore. We also don't have slaves to be released and all of those kinds of things. But they do practice. What's the practice in the Catholic Church of the Jubilee year? What does it entail? I don't actually know. It's a commemoration. It's a recognition of that as a historical fact. But it's good to bring that into memory because ultimately the idea was when you bought a piece of property, you didn't own it. You leased it until the end of the Jubilee, and then it would be returned. Right? So so if you're getting closer, the price is lower because you only have it for that period of time. Right? So that notion of private property that we talked about wasn't actually ingrained in society at that time, right? There was always a return that you did, and if people sold themselves into slavery because of their debts, right? Because a bad crop one year, you've invested all of your money into the crops, the locusts come along and you've lost everything. You have to sell yourself into indenture. But the idea was that it wouldn't be permanent, that it would always be turned back over a period of time. So that's also an important concept. Yes, please.
So I was intrigued and challenged by the distinction between social action and social justice, and the gleaning part to me of the field seems it could be either way. It could be it's just social action because you're just letting the poor eat, but you're not really changing the fate of the poor.
Correct.
And then I'm not saying it right, Tzedakah?
Tzedakah.
Tzedakah has the different levels. At what point in that ladder, do you see the transition between social action and social justice? Because
Yeah.
I work in an institution that gives out food to the poor, but we're not changing the lives of the poor.
Right.
We're just feeding them.
Beautiful. So that and very important. And I think that again, on Maimonides' ladder, the highest level is giving someone a loan so they can start a business, is teaching them a trade so that they can earn a living. So it's education and it's opportunity, right? Which is different than giving someone a meal. Don't stop giving meals, right? Don't say that because this is lower on the rung, I'm not going to do it, right? We have to do the social action too. But if there's a way to also, in the midst of all of that, get beyond the corners of the fields. The good news about the corner of the fields is it preserves dignity. So we are a step up. We are helping someone. We are separating the giver. The person who's giving doesn't meet the person who's taking, right? So so we're at a higher level. It's good. Everything we do is better. Anything we do is better. Certainly anything's better than doing nothing, right? So we have to recognize that. And then if there's a way to now think, okay, I've put my energies into this concept of feeding the hungry, which is great and important, and I can give it to someone, I can make a difference in that person's day, that's awesome, right? That's one person who's not going to die on the streets. Awesome. Now, is there some way I can put my attention into microloans? Is there some way that I can give an investment on the other side of the planet? And we know that those microloans actually are small amounts of money that make huge difference. That people can, often women, can start a business that can then feed their family. I mean, right? So we should never be satisfied. I think is the main thing, right? Like do the work, and then do more work, and then keep going, right? Stretch yourself. Find something that does something a little bit more if you want to be in this world of doing both social action and social justice.
I have a question. It's more of a practical question, but first, since we're in a Catholic organization, a confession. I'm not Catholic, but I'm
do it, but I'll listen.
Okay, so for me personally, the most I've ever given was $2,000 at one time to the food bank. That's the most, okay? Now, I've got some friends and their siblings, and they're each going to inherit $2 million cash, and they're not hurting for money. I would like to, I don't know, persuade them to tithe 10%. Okay, I'm not going to go for the 20% program. I'm realistic. Okay, so my question is, what advice do you have for me to help sway them to set aside 200? This is very specific. You know how sometimes just ask for things, they're very specific. I want $200,000 set aside from each of them. So let me know what you want me to do.
I think, you know what, any religious leader knows, part of the job is fundraising. We don't like to talk about it. Nobody likes to talk about it. But any nonprofit, any executive director of a nonprofit, part of what you do is fundraise. It's no fun. And one of the things you learn when you've done fundraising over a period of time is you're actually doing someone a favor. You're helping them. And it's you feel like, oh, I'm going to ask you for money. It's like, oh, it's so embarrassing. You're not asking money for yourself. You're not asking money because I have so much, but I want more. You're saying, I would start with your friend, saying, tell me about your passions. What do you really care about? And maybe they care about, horseback riding. Okay, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that, right? Now, keep going. Tell me more. Like, I don't know about you, but I see a lot of brokenness in the world. And there are things that really, really bother me. What bothers you? What keeps you awake at night? What it's just so upsetting to you that you feel like I'm mad and I'm frustrated and it just should not be that way. Well, there are organizations that are doing something about that. Like, let's look at this together. I don't know, let's do a Google search. Who's making a difference? Who do you admire? Who's actually changing the world? Not just sending themselves up in a rocket because I've got an extra $1 billion. Not that I object to that. I actually think that's kind of cool. Because they're actually doing something that, maybe will benefit the future of humanity. But I hope that's not the only thing they're doing, right? I hope they're also using the $1 billion to plant crops when there's in Darfur, where there's incredible hunger. I don't know. There's people have passions that they don't talk about. And I start there. Don't start with, Rabbi says you got to get stock up. What's the matter with, right? We're all part of the world. What's the matter with you? You don't think you're a part of the world, right? People know that they're insulated. People know they're protected. People know they're safe. Right? They're going to start. Anyone is going to start with, I got to keep myself safe. I got to keep my family safe. I got to make sure they're all well taken care of. I worry about them. Great. You should. We have responsibilities. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. That's in your circle, right? Now what's outside the circle? At a certain point, you got enough money to take care of that. You can be okay. You can be okay. What can you do beyond that? What could 10% of $1 million make? Here's something that could actually translate that into something that's really practical. Here's something I found. That amount of money would make it. That may not be your passion. If I was in your shoes, that would be my passion. But I'm not you. That's my passion. What's your passion? Let me help you with that, right? Start with what could you do, right? And where are they? And maybe you'll find a way. Maybe you won't. Maybe you won't be able to convince them. Don't. And look, it's not your. As we all know, we can't change other people. You can't. There's no like little dial we can flip, right? But we can put ourselves out there, and we can say what's important to us, and we can say what we hear. And especially, you're talking about someone sounds like you've known that person for a long time. So we've been friends a long time, and I know something about you. I know something. I've seen in you that there's something that could be a little bit more. Let's talk about that. Plant the seed. Plant the seed. Yeah, or just refuse to have anything to do with them ever again. That works. Yeah. No, no. Look, everybody's got to make their own decision. It's not your decision to make. It's not your decision to make. It is their decision. Can you be an inspiration? That's fantastic. Does your inspiration work? Maybe not in a moment, but as you say, plant a seed. 10 years from now, it might make a difference. That money's not going anywhere. Maybe 10 years from now, it'll make a difference. Who knows? But being judgmental generally doesn't work well. People don't like being judged.
Just a quick thought on giving generally. The thought crossed my mind that biblically we are told that everything we have is not ours anyway, it's God's. So perhaps from the perspective of giving, it would be possible for some people to get to the point where it would be easier for them to give if they recognize that fact, that they are blessed by God and they're really sharing God's blessings with others.
People already think I'm a radical socialist enough. Don't back me into that corner. Yes. I mean, I think humility, which is what I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier. Sorry, let me back up one more step, because I gave you before that whole concept that the world was created just for me, right? That's arrogance. You know what? We need a little arrogance. We need a little arrogance in life. There's an idea that I didn't bring today, but it's a great text. It's called Two Pockets, that one should walk around the world with two pieces of text, one in each pocket. One piece of text is the one we saw. The world was created just for me. Stick that in your pocket. It's great. And the other piece of paper, you write, I am nothing but dust and ashes. Put that in the other pocket. And then see what it feels like to walk around, right? And that's kind of the reality, right? We live with an arrogance of, there's never been another me. There never will be another me. And I'm created in the divine image, and I have a certain amount of power that I have privilege, is the terminology that we use these days. I've got privilege. What can I do with that privilege, right? And to walk around with humility, to say, you know, everything that I own is not mine. It's all God. It's all a blessing. I should take nothing for granted. And I should live with that sense of it all is. You can't live in that world, right? You can't live in that world of absolute humility. You can't live in that world of absolute arrogance, unless you're running for president, then you can. But you can't, right? You can't live in that world of absolute arrogance, because you have no relationship with people. You don't see other people as people, right? You can't live in that too. You have to live with two pockets. You got to live between the two of those things. So yeah, you've got some possessions, and that's it. That's in my circle, and these mean something to me. And maybe sometimes you can think, you know, does it mean too much to me? Does that really matter so much? Maybe this belongs outside the circle, right? We can play with that. Don't be so certain about your boundaries, right? Live with that a little bit. But that's where generosity comes from, is to be able to see something that's outside of your circle.
I wanted to say something about tzedek tirdof, justice shall you pursue, and the repetition of tzedek, of justice, and that this is maybe to your point about the latter, that maybe that word is repeated because we have to have both kinds of social justice. We're commanded twice because we have to do the immediate, and we have to think about what else we can do to prevent the immediate from happening. And I just want to remind everybody that tzedakah, the giving, comes from that root word tzedek, that justice. The giving is just. That is what justice is. And that's why we're commanded to do it. But anyway, thank you.
It's my wife, Cantor Cahana, also from Congregation Beth Israel, who is not a plant, but always brings wisdom. Both wisdom and generosity. And
yeah, I was going to introduce her. If you know anything about Judaism, in that tradition, the cantors are really quite an important spiritual leader. Doesn't just lead the songs. So thank you. So glad you came as well. Yeah. Do you have one last question?
You mentioned it at the beginning of your remarks about how we're in a pretty challenging time for some immigrant communities. So can you talk a little bit about, and I think it was on one of the slides, kind of the Jewish concept of welcoming the stranger and what that means, I guess, in that tradition?
Yeah, thank you for doing that, because that is really kind of core to a lot of the mission around here. That notion of welcoming the stranger, it's always tied. It's mentioned more times in the Torah, first 5 books of Moses, than any other concept. And it's usually paired with, for you were stranger a stranger in the land of Egypt. You know the feelings of the stranger because you were a stranger. It's that which is empathy, right? That welcoming the stranger is not out of an obligation. It's not out of responsibility. It's on the ladder. It's not, someone's going to get mad at you if you don't. You know what it's like to be the stranger. And I think everybody's had a moment in your life where you were the outsider. You were the one that didn't know the lingo. You were the one who didn't get what everybody was talking about. You were the one who didn't know how to work it, didn't know how to work the systems. Many of us, probably all of us, have family that came from somewhere else. We were immigrants here at one time or another, some against our will. Some of us, we found a refuge here. Some of us, we all have our story. All of us have our stories. But we know what it is like to be the stranger. And so if we deeply have that empathy, we would want to not let someone else feel that. Make sure that we are doing what we can to let the stranger be welcomed, to see them as not you versus me, as, unfortunately our politics, again, because we're so property-based, because there are lots of different reasons, we see everything as zero sum. If someone else is getting successful, it means someone else is failing, right? If your friend is getting a couple extra $1 million, hey, what about me? What's going on here? That doesn't feel right, right? And we don't have to see things as zero sum. We don't have to worry that if immigrants are coming, that they're taking away our jobs. It's nonsense, right? It's not how it actually works, right? They are a part of our community, and they make our community better. And we're all lifted, right, when we welcome the stranger. And we have a more kind society and a more interesting and diverse society. Lots of good food, right? Comes in from different places. How great is that, right? There's so much beauty and diversity. I mean, it just makes the things that we're hearing in our politics so sickening. It's so disheartening that people can dehumanize the stranger. And that's the force we're always working with, right? The opposite of everything we're talking about here, the opposite of seeing the divine in every human being, is to see another person as not human for whatever reason. Color of their skin, the person that they love, their history, their accent, their food, their whatever, right? That they're not us, right? And we divide the world. And the truth of the matter is, this is time tested. It's been around forever. People in power succeed when people below are divided. And it's very conscious. It's not accidental. Right? And so we have to see what do you gain from this kind of division? Trying not to be political, but I think that's part of our world. The humanity, the opposite of that sense of division, that us and them-ism, is to see the other as like you. I was a stranger in the land of Egypt. I know. Tell me your story. I don't know your story exactly. I don't know, but I have a story that's, not that dissimilar. I can empathize with you. I can sympathize with you. Let's share our stories. Let's understand each other. So, incredibly important commandment, and I think very core to all of the things we're talking about. Thank you for bringing that up. I think we got to call it a day. There's food. I'm standing between you and food. Yeah. Terrible. Thank you to those online. Appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, Rabbi.